Wait, he's waking up. Quick, fetch the medicus. The frantic shout was instantly followed by the sound of scurrying footsteps slapping against cold stone floors. Somewhere nearby, a heavy wooden door was hastily pushed open, the echoing rattle vibrating uncomfortably in Rian's ears. He groaned, a deep, exhausted sound, using every ounce of what little energy he could muster to twist his neck and turn his head toward the noise. "Don't move, just stay exactly where you are, please." It was the same voice from before, gentle but firm. As Rian forced his heavy eyelids to part, a sudden icy chill ran across his body. A violent flash of purple haze bled across his vision, pulsing behind his eyes before it gradually faded away, leaving his sight blurry but normal. Groggy, disoriented, and completely spent, he braced his forearms against the mattress and slowly began to push himself up into a seated position. "What?" he muttered, the words thick and almost entirely incoherent. "Shh! Rest now. The medicus is on her way. She'll look over you." A man beside him spoke. The voice drifted closer, and as Rian's vision finally cleared, the speaker came into focus. An elderly man clad in oversized, faded brown rags leaned over him. The man placed two calloused hands upon Rian's shoulders, gently but unyieldingly pushing him back down onto the sheets. His slicked-back white hair caught a pale reflection from the morning sunlight blooming through the broken slate tiles of the ruined roof above. White whiskers darted out from either side of his weathered face, bordering a long, snowy beard that dangled well below his collar. Once Rian was safely lying down again, the old man spoke, his tone softening. "You must have a lot of questions, son. But one thing at a time, you hear?" He dragged over a small, three-legged wooden stool that lay nearby, settling himself upon it with a low sigh before folding his arms over his chest. Rian did not reply. Instead, his eyes darted frantically around the unfamiliar room before settling on his own body. He raised his hands, bringing them close to his face, trying desperately to find something, anything, to familiarize himself with. But he recognized nothing. Not the scars, not the shape of his fingers, not even the texture of his skin. Who am I?" he managed to whisper, panic tightening his throat. "Your name?" "Rian, I was told," the old man questioned, his brow furrowing with gentle concern. "Does that sound correct to you?" Rian grunted in quiet dismay. It didn't. The name felt empty, like a garment that didn't fit. He closed his eyes tightly, trying his absolute best to piece together the disjointed memories of the past few moments, straining to connect what he was seeing with a past, a home, a life. He searched the darkness behind his eyelids for a face, a voice, a single familiar street. There was nothing, just a vast, terrifying void. Before the panic could swallow him, the old man dragged his stool a little closer, the wood scraping sharply against the stone floor. "Listen, son. You've been through a deeply traumatic experience. I won't say more on it, for it's truly not my place, but any questions you have can be given to the medicus. She'll help you. Trust me." Right at that moment, the heavy rhythm of footsteps echoed from the corridor outside, more pairs than he had heard before. The wooden door burst open, flooding the dim room with a dazzling, blinding light that made Rian flinch, throwing an arm up to avert his eyes. Once his vision adjusted, two new figures were leaning over his bedside. One was a little girl, likely the source of the frantic footsteps from moments ago, and the other was an elderly woman. She was small and severely hunched back, draped in weathered, heavy robes with a deep hood. Slung across her shoulder was a thick leather satchel that rattled with the sound of clinking trinkets and glass vials as she drew closer to the bed. "You may go now, my dear. Thank you," the old woman murmured to the little girl, who offered a quick nod before turning and running back out into the sunlight. "Sigrid, I'm glad you're here," the old man said, exhaling a breath as he stood up. "The poor boy's all jumbled and confused." "This was to be expected," Sigrid replied, her voice raspy but practiced. "I think I'll leave you to it then," the old man said, heading toward the exit. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Rian. "Once you're up, boy, come find me. You'll need all the help you can get." He strolled out, pulling the heavy wooden door shut behind him with a definitive click. Sigrid moved closer, her weathered hands surprisingly strong as she helped Rian ease back up into a seated position. As she leaned in, Rian caught the subtle, bitter scent of floral hints emanating from her satchel, likely a poultice or dried herbs she had prepared. Again, he tried desperately to place the smell, to tie it to a memory, but it slipped through his fingers. Instead, a sharp, white-hot throb of pain suddenly flared just above the left side of his temple. He winced, instinctively moving his hand to touch the injury, but Sigrid slapped his hand down with a swift, stern grip. "I wouldn't do that, not yet. It's still healing," she scolded gently. "Is it hurting?" Rian nodded tightly. Sigrid reached into her dark satchel, rummaging through the trinkets, until she pulled out a thin glass vial filled with a shimmering, clear blue liquid. She popped the cork with her teeth and handed it to him, steadying his hand. "Here, drink this. It will help with the pain, though it can be quite spicy, I'm afraid." Rian swallowed the blue medicine. The liquid burned like fire as it slid down his throat, making him cough softly, but the effects were almost instantaneous. The sharp, agonizing edge of the pain vanished entirely, replaced by a dull, manageable throb deep within his skull. "Thank you," Rian murmured, his throat feeling raw. Sigrid nodded, taking the very same stool the old man had occupied moments before. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning his face. "Now, little one, tell me. What do you remember? Can you recall anything of what happened to you?" Rian took a deep, shaky breath, letting his mind wander into the blank space of his thoughts once more. How could a person remember absolutely nothing? It defied logic. Nothing made sense. Not the room, not the smells, not even the muscles of his own arms. A cold wave of anxiety began to twist in his stomach. "I am trying, but there is nothing. I'm sorry," he replied, lowering his gaze to the tattered bedsheets, a heavy sense of shame settling over him. "Listen to me, Rian. That is your name, yes? From what I know, you were in a horrible, violent accident. You've taken quite a severe hit to the head, son." She watched his eyes closely, studying his reactions to see if the word accident triggered a spark. It did not. "What happened to me? Do you know?" he pleaded, desperate for her to fill the empty spaces. Sigrid glanced warily toward the door before leaning in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It was those nasty raiders to the east, I heard. I'm old, my boy. I've seen a lot of grief and pain in my time, but nothing as wicked as when they decide to crawl out of their holes and attack our poor people." Rian watched her face darken. Pure, unadulterated hatred contorted her features. Her knuckles turned white as she grasped her satchel tighter, her thin, yellowed nails digging deep into the leather. "The evil, pointy-eared—" She cut herself off sharply, releasing a long, shuddering sigh to calm herself. "Let's not worry about them right now, okay? You focus entirely on getting better, and then you'll be able to get back out there." She stood up abruptly, wandering over to a heavy wooden cupboard on the opposite side of the room. "Raiders?" Rian thought, the word echoing in his empty mind. Were those the creatures that had broken him? What did she mean by pointy-eared? Every answer he received only gave rise to a dozen more questions. From the old woman's visceral reaction, these raiders must be the most monstrous villains to walk the earth. What had they done to her? What had they done to him? "Pointy-eared," he whispered under his breath. His eyes scanned the sparse room, searching desperately for any reflective surface. To his right, sitting on a small bedside table, stood a polished silver jug filled with water. Reaching out, his fingers wrapped around the handle, and he slowly began to pull it toward his face, intending to catch his reflection in the warped silver metal, while his left hand crept up toward the side of his head to feel the shape of his own ears. "Pointy-eared," he whispered again. Before he could bring the jug into view, Sigrid suddenly materialized beside him. She snatched the silver jug clean out of his grasp, placing it entirely out of reach on a high shelf. "What do you think you're doing, child? No heavy lifting and absolutely no stress. Please settle down," she barked, her tone sharp. "Sorry," Rian mumbled, pulling his hand away from his head. Sigrid's expression softened, and she let out a forced, airy laugh to break the sudden tension. "Trust me, child. If you had anything to do with those foul creatures, we'd have known by now. Anyway, here, these are for you. Once you are up and about, you'll want to look the part." She dropped a bundle of clothes onto the foot of the bed, a simple green tunic that fastened at the neck, sturdy brown suede pants, and a pair of worn black leather shoes. "Apologies if they're a bit tattered," she said softly, her fingers lightly brushing the fabric of the tunic with a sudden, distant sadness. "They used to belong to my grandson, you see." Rian didn't dare ask what had happened to the grandson. Instead, he managed a quiet, "Thank you again. You have been incredibly kind to me. Your wounds will heal in time. You are still young. Just don't go touching those bandages, you hear?" Sigrid said, her eyes remaining fixed on the clothes for a moment longer before she snapped out of it. Wounds, Rian thought. He cautiously touched the very edge of the cloth dressing. To his surprise, the thick linen wrapped far further around the back and side of his head than a simple blow to the temple would ever warrant. Was there something else under there? He checked the rest of his body, moving his arms and legs, but felt no other pain. For now, he decided to be content with just having a name. Slowly, he drew back the heavy blanket and swung his feet out, planting them onto the cold, unforgiving stone floor. "Slowly now," Sigrid warned. Bracing one hand on the bedside table and the other flat against the mattress, Rian pushed himself upward. When he fully straightened, he realized he was noticeably tall, towering well over the hunched frame of the medicus. He swayed slightly, his balance entirely off. But as he took a few tentative steps around the stone room to force the blood back into his legs, the dizziness subsided. He looked down at his exposed arms and chest. There were no visible signs of trauma, but he noticed his frame was surprisingly toned, with firm muscle definition protruding from his chest and upper arms. Was he a soldier? A blacksmith? A manual laborer? Moving over to the foot of the bed, he began to dress himself. Sigrid stepped in behind him, carefully guiding the green tunic over his head so as not to snag the thick bandages. To his surprise, the garments fit flawlessly, draping over his shoulders as if they had been tailored for him. Sigrid stepped back, looking him up and down with a proud, nostalgic smile. "A perfect fit," she beamed. "So, what do I do now?" Rian asked, looking toward the heavy wooden door. She paused, tapping her chin. "Oh, go see old Zarek. That was the lovely gentleman who was sitting with you earlier. I'm certain he's more than happy to help you jog that memory of yours." "Zarek, okay, where does he stay?" "Not far at all, dear. Head out the door, take a right down the slope, and just outside the Stag and Bull Tavern, you'll find a wee stone cottage. That's his home. Do you want me to fetch a guide for—" Rian cut her off with a gentle wave of his hand. "No, that's all right. I'm hoping the walk will help me remember something. Anything." Sigrid smiled, reaching into her cupboard and returning with a small leather satchel. "Here, take these for the road." She handed it over. Inside were 3 more glass vials of the shimmering blue liquid. "Thanks," Rian said, a genuine smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Once I'm back to my old self, whoever that may be, I owe you. Maybe I can buy you something nice." Sigrid giggled softly, the sound wrinkling her ancient face, and shooed him toward the exit. "Ugh, don't you be silly, boy. Just you come on back if you have any more troubles, you hear?" With a final nod, Rian stepped out, and the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind him. Immediately he was hit by a wall of crisp, fresh mountain air and a blinding sheet of sunlight. He took a deep, filling breath, letting the clean air settle his racing heart before releasing it. Looking around, he tried to take a deliberate mental note of his surroundings. Down the slope to the right, he reminded himself. The infirmary he had just exited stood upon a high stone overhang, fenced off from the steep drop by a crude, built-up wall of heavy boulders. Looking out past the barrier, Rian's breath caught. Spread out beneath him was a sprawling, tightly packed settlement of stone buildings, varying in ancient hues of weathered gray and deep earth brown. At a glance, he could tell this city had stood for centuries. Its foundations were deeply rooted in the mountain itself. Leaning against the stone fence, he took in the bustling life below. The streets were alive with activity. Townsfolk hurried about their days. Merchants shouted from behind little wooden stalls filled with colorful merchandise, and in the center of a wide cobble square, children laughed and splashed in a grand stone fountain. Others ran wild down narrow alleyways or perched precariously atop rooftops they had no business climbing. From the outside, It looked like an entirely peaceful, normal town filled with normal, decent folk. Rian let out a quiet sigh. Maybe this was his life. Maybe he wasn't anyone significant at all. Maybe he was just a regular man who worked the docks or the fields, going about a quiet existence. He wasn't against the idea in the slightest. He just wanted to know the truth. Pushing away from the stone wall, he turned to his right and began navigating the downward slope, which tapered sharply around the corner of a massive stone storehouse. The midday sun beat down heavily upon his face, and Rian worried briefly about the heat irritating his head wound. Fortunately, as he reached the bottom of the slope, the buildings leaned inward toward one another, their overhanging wooden roofs almost touching across the narrow street, casting the cobblestones into a welcome, cool shadow. The Stag and Bull Tavern. "Where are you?" Rian thought, realizing he had no idea what a tavern sign even looked like. He was just beginning to regret turning down that guide when a sudden movement caught his eye. He stepped forward and nearly collided with a heavy wooden sign jutting out from the stone masonry to his right. His shoulder clipped it, sending it swinging back and forth with a loud metallic screech. Encrusted in dark hammered iron upon the wood were the distinct shapes of two beasts, a stag and a bull. This must be it, Rian thought. A split second later, the heavy wooden door beneath the sign swung backward with a violent crash. A large, heavily built man came flying backward out of the tavern, sailing through the air before landing hard on the rough cobblestones right at Rian's feet. The man groaned, rolling in the dirt. Rian looked up and saw an even more massive figure standing framed in the doorway, his massive fists clenched. It was immediately clear the man on the ground hadn't stumbled. He had been violently thrown. "One more time, I dare ya!" The bouncer in the doorway spat, his voice like grinding rocks. "One more time, and I'll make sure the town guards know your miserable face, and toss you straight to the wolves." The massive bouncer shot a quick, piercing glance at Rian, looking him up and down with intense scrutiny. For a terrifying fraction of a second, Rian thought he saw a distinct purple hue flash within the bouncer's eyes, a strange, unnatural light that sent a jolt of alarm through his amnesia. Rian blinked hard, and when he looked again, the eyes were a mundane, dark brown. The bouncer turned and vanished back into the dark interior of the tavern, slamming the door shut. Rian shook off the bizarre hallucination and turned his attention to the man groaning on the ground, who was clumsily trying to push himself up to his knees. "Here, take my hand," Rian offered, extending his forearm down to the fallen man. I don't need... I said I... The drunkard stammered, his words slurring heavily as he looked up at the stranger. The man's eyes immediately locked onto the massive, glaring white bandage wrapped tightly around Rian's head. A heavy silence fell between them for a moment. The drunkard spluttered, a wide, toothy grin breaking through his bruised face as he let out a loud laugh. "Honestly, chap, I think you need a hand far more than I do." Rian didn't drop his arm, keeping it extended with quiet patience. Finally the man relented, grasping Rian's forearm with a slippery grip. With a single, effortless pull, Rian yanked the heavy man completely up onto his feet. The sheer strength in his own muscles surprised him. "Eh, cheers," the man muttered, suddenly avoiding all eye contact, looking thoroughly embarrassed. "Are you hurt?" Rian asked, trying to maintain a polite, steady tone. "Ha! Are any of us?" The man chuckled dryly, wiping dirt from his trousers. "But I, pal, just a wee bit drunk. What in the hell's happened to you? Were you almost eaten alive by one of those big-eared creatures? Ha!" The man suddenly doubled over, dry heaving violently. Fortunately for Rian's new clothes, nothing left the man's stomach. Rian quickly took 2 large steps back just in case. "Listen, sir," Rian pressed, eager to move on. "I am looking for someone named Zarek. I was told he lives right around here. Do you know of him?" The man, his eyes glazed over and completely unfocused, offered a vague nod over Rian's shoulder before stumbling off down the alleyway in the opposite direction. The bustling townsfolk on the street explicitly gave the thrashing, drunken man a wide berth as he passed. Rian turned around to look where the man had pointed, and to his absolute shock, the elderly man from the infirmary Zarek was standing a mere 3 paces away. Rian's heart skipped a beat. The cobblestones were loud, yet he hadn't heard a single footstep approach. Zarek stood quietly, his hands tucked into his brown rags, calmly observing the entire scene. "Zarek, I assume?" Rian asked, trying to mask his surprise. Did you just witness all of that?" "I saw enough," Zarek replied softly. A brief, inexplicable shudder ran through the old man's frame before his kindly smile returned. He nodded toward the heavy wooden door of the establishment. "Anyway, you fancy a drink, son?" Rian nodded in response, stepping aside to wait for the old man to lead the way. As Zarek pushed open the door and stepped into the dim, noisy warmth of the tavern, Rian paused on the threshold. He raised his left hand, his fingers lightly brushing against the thick, coarse linen of the bandages hiding the shape of his head. "Big-eared creatures," the drunkard's words echoed ominously in his mind. Rian took a deep breath, dropped his hand, and followed Zarek into the shadows.